So, okay, this is our presentation. Now it's time to answer your questions. I do want to remind you that the questions and answers need to be available to all participants, that when you ask that question, you do have it available to all of us. So, Casey Sanchez, if we are planning on creating a corporation, do we need to create that before applying, or can it be done after getting the license? So, Casey, it has to be done prior to submitting your application. So, your registered business name with the California Secretary of State and your registration number is required to be listed on your application. So, all of that has to be ready to go before you submit your application, because the information needs to be on your application. James, if you were employed by a contractor in another state where a contractor's license is not required, can you still use this contractor to demonstrate work experience? This is in regard to the C-32 license. That is correct. Your experience can be out of state. We do want to see that the information provided on the certificate of work experience matches what we require of the C-32. So it's just a matter of verifying that information. Is the qualifier required to have a California driver's license? No, they are not. It's not a requirement. I would recommend, though, if you don't have a California driver's license, if you do have an ID card, that you do submit that number on your application, though. Can owner builder experience be used for the B2 residential remodeling classification? No. So owner builder is for the B class only. And this question is from Daniel. The B2 is not something that is permittable and does not necessarily have to be inspected. So no, you're not going to be able to use the owner builder form for that. You would just use the work experience form with a certifier that's certifying the B2 work that you have done. What can be done if a certifier does not want to cooperate? Can I just submit tax documents or pay stubs as proof? Unfortunately, no. All applicants must have a certifier to certify their work. And a certifier does not have to be an employer or a licensed contractor. It's somebody who has the firsthand knowledge of the experience of your, what they saw you do. And again, firsthand knowledge. So they were on site. It's not word of mouth. They've seen you perform the work. And again, it does not have to be an employer or a licensed contractor. Are all license applications required to take and pass the exam regardless of years of work experience and specific license being applied for? So the exams are dependent upon the classification that you're applying for. So if you apply for an A, B, or a regular C classification, then there will be an exam for the classification as well as the law. If you're applying for a D, which is a C61 subcategory classification, that would just entail the law exam portion. But it is based upon your classification that you're applying for. And at this point, without further information, everyone is required to take those exams. How early can an applicant take exam once approved? So once your application is posted, your information is sent to PSI, and you receive notification in the mail where you have to register with them, and then you can pick your date. And it would be dependent upon what dates are available. So you can't say, it would obviously not be the next day, but you would have to wait after you register to see what was available, Casey. Jake, I submitted my transcripts directly to the CSLB. Do I need to resend after I have them sent to me? Do I need to fill out a new application and pay an additional $450? So Jake, did you send them prior to your application? Because we only hold on to, as a courtesy, we do hold on to transcripts in a location, but we can't keep them forever. And periodically it is checked. If we don't see something coming in, an application with that name, then we're not going to hold on to them and we're going to send them back if there was an address listed on the transcripts. Your best thing to do, as stated in the workshop, is to have your transcripts unopened, sent in with your application. I would wait if you already sent in your application, and once you receive, if you receive notification from your processing technician, reach out to them and ask them if they received your transcripts, if they were submitted with it, or maybe if you have sufficient work experience, you might not need them. But you do not have to send in a new application and pay another fee if you've already submitted your application and we're just waiting for your transcripts. The solution would be that the transcripts will have to be sent in again unopened. I hope that answers your question, Jake. Christopher, I have a BSBA in HR as well as Master Class 2 Limited Energy Systems license since 2017 in Washington State. I'm assuming that all work will pass right over, and I'm wondering if I can qualify for an exemption on any of those tests. So CSLB, California, does not have reciprocity with Washington State. We do have reciprocity with Arizona, Louisiana, and Nevada only. Chances are, once we review your application, once it's submitted, you will be, and your information is acceptable, you will be required, dependent upon the classification that you're applying for, test for the classification and for the law exams. Daniel, for self-employed contracting experience on small jobs under $500, is there a recommended number of clients to certify work experience? It's dependent upon your dates, Daniel. So if you're going project to project, it's really dependent upon your experience. I can't, if you're 2-day projects, you're going to have whoever was your certifier for that project fill out your work experience. That's kind of a loaded question. You have to total 48 months of experience, which equals 4 years. And if that is made up of a whole bunch of different projects, then you're going to have to submit a certification of work experience per project, and you're going to have a certifier per work experience form that you submit. Parisa, how long after we pass the exam do we get the insurance and bonds in place? So after you pass the exam, you will be put in line for issuance. Dependent on if you've sent in your ILF, which is your initial licensing fee, you will then receive, you should receive a letter after you get your exam stating these are your issue requirements and this is what you need to submit before you can go forward. That letter is going to tell you to pay your ILF. It's going to tell you to get your contractor's bond and your workers' compensation, plus any additional information pertaining to the application that you've applied for. So you do have 90 days from the date you received that letter. I would advise not to get insurance until after, only because you're paying for something that you're not using. And if you want to save a few dollars, wait until we've asked you to put it in place before you do it. If you fail one of the tests, what is the time frame? Heard from the initial or second time takes about 8+ weeks. Again, if you do fail the test, you have to pay the non-refundable retest fee of $100, and you have to schedule that with PSI. I'm not certain it's taking 8 weeks. I think that's a little excessive, but you would have to check with PSI once you've paid for that retest fee, because they would have the calendar open to you and you would be able to pick when you'd get to go back. So it is dependent upon once you've paid and when you're able to go back in and select a new date. Sierra, to qualify for an exam exemption, does being a son-in-law count as immediate family to a contractor's license holder? Well, Sierra, it depends on the circumstances. Are you applying for your own license, or are you trying to take over a family member's license? So I need a little bit more information. You could, with your more information, send an email to licensing@cslb.ca.gov, and we'd be better equipped once we know a little bit more information to answer that question a little better for you. Christopher, all work is commercial, government, utility, military, etc., everything but residential. I don't know what your original question was, Christopher. Oh, Washington State. So to have a contractor's license in California, it doesn't matter. You still have to have a license. So you would be required to take that law and the law and the trade, depending upon the classification you're applying for in California. Again, we don't have reciprocity with Washington. If I purchase a property out of state and lived in the property during a 6-month remodel, will this qualify for experience? It could, Ryan. However, again, we can't pre-qualify you. You would have to send in your information in the form of your application with your fees for us to review your application and the experience that's set forth on that application for us to determine whether or not we could pass you on for testing. Sophia, how recent the certification should be dates as? Can you submit work experience certified 2 years ago? So the certification of work experience form should have a current date from your certifier at the bottom of the page. We do not want to see something from 2 years ago. We do need to see something current. Now, the experience could have been within the last 10 years, but the certification being signed by your certifier should be recent, and there should be a recent date on there from that person. How long after we pass the exam do we have to get the insurance and bonds in place? Again, I believe I did answer that. You're going to get, once you pass your exams, you're going to receive a bond and fee letter that states, hey, pay your ILF, get us your contractor's bond, your workers' compensation, maybe your open book asbestos. You have 90 days to do that. And then after that, if we don't hear from you or if it has not been submitted, your application could void in the system and the fees are non-refundable. Are we able to download this after, and how can I do that? You should be able to download this later on our channel or look at it on YouTube. We will have closing information that is on display from our public affairs office that should give you the details of how you can do that. Christian. GS, hello. What is the current processing time that the CSLB is currently experienced from the time the application is submitted? In other words, when we hear from the board after our application submission. So right now, let me go check it. I believe we're about, and I may be over exaggerating, about 6 to 8 weeks. So I'm going to go check it on our website, which you can also do. In the search bar, I put in CSLB processing times. And as of Monday the 2nd, the dates being worked on for original applications, which would mean people who are going to take exams, is 11/17. So the exam applications that were received on this date is currently what is being processed as new. I am from Canada and registered a LLC construction company and have EIN from the IRS. I am general contractor with 12 years experience. Can I apply for a B2 license? You can. Again, your entity has to be registered with the California Secretary of State first. You do need to have a registration number from the California Secretary of State. We don't deal with an FEIN or EIN from the IRS. We just want your registration number. Well, we will check the status of that corp or LLC. If you are a general contractor, and you're asking if you can qualify for the B2, you could, but you do have to keep in mind the B2 is not the same as a general contractor, so there will be limitations on what you can perform. As stated in the workshop, you cannot do new or do repairs on electrical, HVAC. You can't do structural repairs or new structural as far as trades are concerned. Good things that you possibly could as a B2 licensee perform would be, let's say, fencing, drywall, and painting. But again, you can't do any structural work as a B2 if you indeed are a general contractor from another country or state. And it would, there are some restrictions that we listed in our workshop for the B2 classification. But again, 12 years experience, you would have to submit your application with your experience, and it would be reviewed and a determination would be made from there. We can't pre-qualify you now. Are the two exams scheduled on the same day or different dates, and how many hours are the exams? So the exams are scheduled on the same day, and I believe the exams are about 3 hours apiece. There could possibly be an option to do the exams on different days. However, once you receive notification from PSI, you register and you'll have to check with them to see if you can switch it up and not do them both together or schedule them together. And again, about 3 hours per exam. Ryan, I have purchased several properties over the last 10 years. 3 of the properties are personally remodeled and have hold as rentals. 2 additional properties I also personally remodeled and sold for profit. Will this qualify for work experience? Again, it could. However, again, we need to see your application and the certification of work experience. If you are going to claim owner builder on the properties that you have remodeled and purchased, you will be asked to provide the owner builder project list as well as the work experience form, in addition to permits and possibly final inspections, so that we can see who did do the work, who pulled the permits, what work was done on the properties, and this is to ascertain if you have the qualifications to move on with the classification you've applied for. So again, owner builder is only for the B classification, Ryan, so you would have to be applying for the B. Otherwise, you would just use the certification of work experience form for any other classification. Lewis, I have a bachelor's degree in business admin and 8 years plus in experience. I'd like to get a licensee as a specialty contractor, tile and ceramic, or get the general contractor's class B2. Does my education count for credits? Does a certifier need to be your employer or not? Does it need to be someone in the trade? So the general contractor's class first is a class B. So let's not confuse. B2 is for remodeling. So we don't want to confuse it with the general contractor's license. They cannot do the same things. If you wanted to apply for the C54 tile and ceramic, or if you wanted to do the B2 remodeling, it is a possibility that your degree can get you educational credit. But again, we have to be able to see this on paper. We gave you a general idea of what kind of credit you could receive from different degrees. However, I can't give you specific information until we have your application in hand. So you could possibly get credit. Your certifier does not, again, need to be your employer. A certifier is someone who has firsthand knowledge of your experience. If you look at the certification of work experience, it can be a business associate, a fellow employee, it can be the contractor, it can be your employee, it could be a union representative. They do not have to be licensed, and they do not have to be your employer. Deborah, what is the renewal fee after the 2 years? So it is dependent upon the classification that you've applied for, as well as your entity. So I would need, let me see if I can pull that up. Give me just a second. So as of January 1st, and I'm just using that as a stepping stone here. Let's see here, reactivation, where's renewal? Okay, so I just see reactivation for a sole owner is $450, reactivation for a non-sole owner, which would mean your other entities, which is a partnership, a corporation, an LLC, is $700. And then they do assess delinquent fees if you do not pay them on time at that 2-year mark, which is 50% of the actual renewal fee. So $450 for a sole owner, $700 for anything other than a sole owner. And then again, your delinquent fee is 50% of the fees if you are late renewing your license. So it is very detrimental that you do keep track of when you expire so that you have that. Casey, do we just need at least one of the acceptable documentation for the application? Casey, I don't understand the question. Could you clarify that? List one of the acceptable documentations for the application. Yeah, I'm not quite sure, Casey, and there's a lot to scroll through. If you could just reiterate exactly what you're asking there. Parisa, do I need to list my realtor broker license on the application? No, it doesn't do anything for your application. We're not going to look at that as part of the experience. Your experience is your hands-on, your supervision of employees. If you work for a contractor, being a realtor or a broker is not going to necessarily give you any kind of experience or clout to that manner. Ryan, if I apply for a B and my work experience is not approved, can I switch application to request the B2? If yes, is an additional application fee required? So yes, you can. So you can change your application before we post your application. Once your application has been posted, which means deemed acceptable, you can't make any changes. If you decide to change it before we post it, there is no additional fee. It is just a correction. You will have to correct it on the first page of your application as well as on your certification of work experience, because the work experience will have to match the classification being applied for, Ryan. Deborah says, thank you. No, thank you, Deborah, for attending. Does anybody have any other questions? Casey, regarding the demonstrating work experience, do we need at least one of the acceptable documentation for the application? So, Casey, depending on the classification that you're applying for and how you're applying for it, if you're applying for the B and you're trying to use owner builder, you're going to have per project one certification of work experience form, one project experience form or owner builder project experience form, plus your permits and finalized inspections from the city or county. If it is not owner builder, then you're going to have, if you, let's say you had multiple employers, you're going to have one certification of work experience per employer to total that 48 months or 4 years experience that is required of every applicant. Does that answer your question? Okay, so C33, so a C33, you just need work experience form, the certification of work experience form with a certifier. If you have more than one employer, again, whatever your employment times that add up to the 48 months, which is 4 years, that's what we would need. Parisa, does Bachelor of Architecture count for more than 8 months? Okay, 18 months, excuse me. We'd have to see. Again, we can't pre-qualify you, and I can't give you a definitive answer without seeing the degree with your application. We do have to see that it is a sealed transcript submitted with your application, what the degree is, and how it pertains to the classification that you've applied for. So Parisa, again, we can't pre-qualify that. We would need to have your information in with your application in order to best give you the answer to that question. Again, earlier on in the workshop, we did give you a limited, but information on what possibly could give you this much, credit towards your work experience with education, but it is dependent upon the class that you've applied for and the degree that that you have obtained. Do I need to submit transcripts with a degree from over 10 years ago? Yes, you do. All applicants, if you're going to try to use education as some of that work experience, you will need to obtain a sealed transcript that's going to be sent in with your application so that we can see that this is valid, that it was for this degree, and that it was completed. We will need a sealed transcript from 30 years ago if you have that. And that's just in case an applicant wants to use education. If you don't, then obviously you don't have to submit that. You're welcome. Sophia, regarding the question, regarding the dated certification, what is the only person that can certify is deceased? Well, that would be a problem. I would state, because we can't take something backdated. It does have to be pretty current, and I would say probably within the last 90 days. There was nobody else who has firsthand knowledge of the experience obtained. A fellow employee, another person on the job, another contractor that was there. I would, try to find somebody else who might have that, the knowledge of your experience if it's you applying. But yeah, we can't take something that is backdated. We can't take future dated either. So yeah, we would need something dated, like I said, with a current date within at least the last 90 days. Not that there was for the whole 3 years of my experience. I mean, you could submit your experience. However, I can't guarantee that that's gonna that it's gonna be acceptable. And asking the question, me giving you the answer, I would see if I had somebody else who could try to certify you. Ryan, can relatives verify work experience? They can if they have firsthand knowledge of that experience. My suggestion would be that on the certification of work experience, that they check maybe business associate. Do not make a new box. Do not put family member, mom, dad. Check business associate. Use one of the options that we have listed on the certification of work experience. Don't modify it. Just say that they're a relative, but use one of the predetermined answers there. Destin, for a 4-year BS business degree, can I receive the full 24 months of credit? So Destin, as I explained before, we can't give you specific information pertaining to that. We would have to have, again, your application with your sealed transcripts submitted for review. We did give a little bit of a lowdown on what you possibly could get within this workshop. I would recommend maybe go back through the workshop to see what examples we gave. You could also check our website at www.cslb.ca.gov and type in the search bar, business degree, degrees, education degree, and see what we have listed on the website. But I can't make a predetermination for you at this time. You're welcome. We still have time if anybody wants to ask any other questions. If you're shy and you don't want to, you can send an email to licensing@cslb.ca.gov, and your email will be forwarded to somebody to answer, and we can give you some more information. If you have specific information that you want to list in that and not on here, you can also do that. Submit your your email to the licensing email. Dustin, if you see on the screen right now, there are some credit examples for you. So you can take a look at that. Okay, Ryan, reading through the owner builder requirements, it states the properties are required to be lived in for 12 months. Is this correct, or can be an investment property and potentially qualify for experience? It may state that on our website. However, we're not going to ask you for proof that you lived in the house for 12 months. It's not something that we can, you know, we're not going to ask you for a day-by-day blow of where you lived, what was the address, when did you move out. My recommendation would be to get all your information together if you're applying for the B classification with the owner builder, and you have your project list, you have your permits, your finalized inspections, and your certification of work experience from your certifiers. That's mostly what we're going to go off of. But again, we're not going to ask you for the deed to your property. It's not something that that we're gonna ask for. After I finish my plumbing apprenticeship program, would I be possible to apply for the C36 with a recommendation from my UA local representative? And this is for Christian. You can. What we look for when you have an apprenticeship, so you're going to send us your completed apprenticeship. You would, dependent upon what the apprenticeship is and the classification that you're applying for, receive credit for that. If they don't pertain to each other, you will not receive credit. So you can't, just for an example, you can't get an apprenticeship in drywall and lath and plastering and apply for a C36. You will not get credit for that. They do have to go hand in hand. Your local representative at your union can be your certifier. However, with unions, they send you out to work for licensed contractors. That's who needs to be listed as your employer, not the union. So you went out and worked for ABC Plumbing for 24 months. These were the trades that you performed. Your union representative can sign it as a certifier as long as they have the firsthand knowledge of that experience. But your employer should always be who you worked for, not the union. Um, um, Sometimes in cases like this, if people send in that, hey, I worked for UA Local 1234, we're going to ask you for union books to show us. And then what that does is shows us that you were sent out on a job for, like I said, ABC Plumbing, XYZ Plumbing, you know, so those are the people you worked for. Those are the people who should be listed as the employer on the certification of work experience. And again, your certifier can be your union representative as long as they have that firsthand credit of that work being performed. Deborah, thank you. I've worked for Christian. I have worked for multiple contractors. Do I have to get all the contractors? So we're looking, Christian, for 48 months, which totals 4 years work experience. If you worked for 2 people, 2 contractors that equal the 48 months, then you just need 2 work experience forms with 2 certifiers. It's all dependent on how much, where the time was spent and what's going to equal up to that 4 years. So you do, you know, if you have 4, if you have 5, then I would recommend you send in all 5 certification of work experience. Maybe you did 6 months here, 6 months somewhere else, and a year the other places. And they would have to have your certifiers. They don't have to be the contractors, but you have to have certifiers for the work that you performed, telling us that they have the firsthand knowledge and explaining in section 2 of the certification of work experience what you performed. What if I've been working self-employed, getting paid in cash for multiple small jobs, all different customers? Do I need all of them, 4 years worth, to vouch for me in writing? Do they need to prove my employment somehow or just state a period of time they saw me do structural framing or employee management, painting, hammering, etc.? So dependent upon what classification you're applying for, if it's structural framing, you will need, if you're claiming self-employed, you're going to need to fill out, if it wasn't your own property, a construction project experience form. You will be asked to provide finalized permits and inspection reports. And your experience does have to total the 4 years, 48 months. So if that's multiple sites that you worked with people, then unfortunately multiple certification of work experience forms will have to be submitted with those certifiers. Employee management, I do see that there, or let's say supervising, you would have to work for a licensed contractor in order to get experience for overseeing other people, other employees of a licensed contractor. We do not give credit for overseeing other contractors or subcontractors. They are already licensed and they do not need supervision. So you do not gain, no applicant can gain experience from overseeing or supervising a contractor or subcontractor. So again, you need to maybe be a little more clear when the time comes for you to submit your application. I'm not certain how to pronounce your name. I'm going to say Cal. But yeah, you definitely need to whatever adds up to that 4 years worth that we need for every applicant. Okay. Well, that's like 200 customers. That's what you're going to have to submit. Unfortunately, if you don't have something that was consistent, again, let's use ABC Plumbing. I worked for them for 48 months. You know, I put that on my certification of work experience. I have my certifier fill out the section 2 with him or her explaining in detail what I performed and signing off on it. You know, obviously that would be the easiest thing. However, if you have multiple employers, you do have to submit that to us because we do have to see that. And it is always subject to review. We can at any point contact the certifier to verify the experience. That is within our legal right. So you do want to make sure I's are dotted, T's are crossed, and you have all that information when you submit your application. And, I hate to tell you to submit that many. However, if that's what it takes to equal that 4 years of experience, that's what has to be submitted. If permits, Ryan, are not pulled for owner builder work, will this disqualify? Can proof with pictures, missed sale tax returns, and or title transfer possibly work in lieu of permits? Unfortunately, no. For the B classification, where we do require for owner builder or self-employed, when we require permits or finalize inspections, the work that's being performed requires permits and finalized inspections. If you're not doing the work that requires that, then chances are you are not qualified for the B general building classification. So general B, again, is structural with 2 unrelated trades. So let's say you are retrofitting windows, you are installing plumbing and electrical. So all 3 of those require permits from your city or your county. And that's what the B does. B does major structural changes. If it is not structural, first of all, you wouldn't qualify for the B classification. You could possibly apply for the B2, which does not include structural changes and does not include installation or repairs of HVAC, electrical, and plumbing. But we do not accept pictures. We're not going to ask you for tax returns, transfer titles, or mis-sale. It would, we want to be able to ascertain what was performed at that property, who performed it, and we would need, the documentation to show that you are qualified to do that structural work, that new installation of, like I said, electrical or HVAC. Those require permits. If no permits were pulled, chances are it's not B work. Is building a new permitted deck considered structural? No. So what a B is, it's structural work, however, it's for habitable structures. So a general building contractor's principal contracting business is in whole or partial connection with a structure built, being built, or to be built for the support, shelter, and enclosure of persons, animals, chattels, or movable property of any kind requiring in its construction the use of at least 2 unrelated building trades or crafts, or to superintend the whole or any part therefore. So a deck is not habitable, so that would not be considered a structural that you could use towards the B classification. Let's see where we are at here. Can I obtain the B2 without having the C36? Absolutely. So B2, again, no installation repairs of plumbing, electrical, HVAC, no structural framing. B2 would be, let's say carpentry. You can build a cabinet, that's not structural. You can paint, you can do drywall, you can do landscaping, you can build a fence, again, not structural. You do not have to have experience for the C36 in order to obtain the B2. But we do want to see those 3 unrelated trades for the B2, minus what we've stated and what the workshop has stated is not acceptable for the B2. Ryan, thanks for the info. Thank you for attending, Ryan. Dustin, if a homeowner is my certifier, how would they fill out number 7 of the cert of work experience? So they put your name in Part 2, Section 7. So you're the qualifier. And then below that, I think the best option would probably be business associate, unless they want to say that they're your employer because you did do the work for them. It's completely up to them how they want to be listed. If they're not a contractor, obviously you're not going to check contractor. If they're not a union rep, they're not going or a fellow employee, they're not going to check those. It's going to be up to them whether they want to say they're your employer because they hired you to do this work, or if they want to put that they're a business associate of yours, Dustin. There is nothing to say that owner builder. So, I think one of those two options would be your best or their best road to go by on the certification of work experience form. You're welcome, Christian. Again, if you're not comfortable asking a question here, or if you have more information, maybe that you don't want other people to see, or it's maybe a little convoluted, you can always send an email to licensing@cslb.ca.gov, and then your question will be redirected to somebody who can best answer it for you. So let's give it a few more minutes or seconds. If anybody has any questions that they want to submit here, we can still answer them. Again, as you see on our screen, there are some credit examples for education, just in case. Again, we cannot pre-qualify you, so we do want to reiterate that sealed transcripts with your completed application sent in with your fees, and we can give you a better answer. If you don't need to use education, you don't have to. If you have that 4 years, you don't have to go get that sealed transcript and send it in. If you have 4 years, submit your application. If you want to use the education, there's just the requirements. Or your apprenticeship, as long as it pertains to the class you've applied for, definitely send those in so you could get educational credit if that's the route that you want to go. Let's go ahead and do the next slide, please. Here you find, again, the B2, what you can and cannot do. Be advised, 3 or more trades on a project, and you are limited to working on existing residential wood frame structures only. You cannot make structural alterations to load-bearing partitions and walls. You cannot install or extend electrical or plumbing, and you cannot install or replace HVAC. Other than that, the B2 is, pretty straightforward. These are just the items that you cannot perform. Next slide, please. Okay, so hold on, I think I saw another question. I've worked as an assistant PM and PM for 8 years plus. For a high-end residential contractor, can I still obtain the general contractor's license? So I'm thinking you mean project manager. If you have the experience working for a licensed contractor, then the need would be to fill out your application, submit your certification of work experience with a certifier, and we can go from there. We'll have to see what's listed as your trades. Again, your trades need to be specific to the classification being applied for. And you have to have a certifier. So, Luis, we do need to, 8 years sounds like, as long as it's within the last 10 years, sounds like, it possibly could be acceptable. But again, we have to review your application. When does the slide become available to download on the YouTube channel? I am not too certain. Public Affairs does do that. We are gonna talk about that in just a second. I don't know if it's like 24 hours, 48 hours. I'm not quite certain. but check our website and that information should pop up maybe Monday, Tuesday. If not, Deborah, send us an email at licensing@cslb.ca.gov, and I can try to get a more definitive answer for you. Dustin, are tax records required or cross-referenced for certification of work experience? No, they're not, Dustin. We don't ask for tax records. Ryan, is this question and answer portion of the class recorded and provided via email? As far as I know, not provided via email. I'm not certain about, I would think that would be part of the workshop, but I can find out for you if you want to send me an email at licensing@cslb.ca.gov. You can say, hey, please pass this on to Dana, and I can find out that answer for you. So with that being said, okay, hold on. A friend of mine has been building 1/2-inch, 1-foot scaled models of historic houses using miniature wood supplies like popsicle sticks. Could this qualify as work experience for a B class? If this is not a habitable structure, no, it could not be used for experience for B class, the B class. We've actually gotten a couple, hey, we build this to, like the fire department builds something to burn it down for test or for practice for the firemen. That is also not considered a habitable structure. So that person did not receive credit for that because it was a temporary structure that did not house or wasn't habitable. So no, models cannot be used for this. Anything temporary cannot be used for the B classification. Okay, so that's all the time we have today for our workshop. Thank you for all of your questions. If you have any other questions about your application, we encourage you to drop an email to our licensing division. Again, the email address is licensing@cslb.ca.gov. That's licensing@cslb.ca.gov. If at some point you need to reschedule your exams once your application has been posted, you can get that process started by dropping an email to exams, and that's exams@cslb.ca.gov. Next slide. We've also put together a list of available resources for women considering a career in construction. If you haven't already, be sure to download this presentation to get them. You can download the presentation on a green banner on the top of our homepage at www.cslb.ca.gov. If you're watching the archive video of this workshop on our YouTube page, you'll find a link in the presentation down below.
Next slide. We welcome your comments or topics for the future webcasts. Just drop us an email to social@cslb.ca.gov. Special thanks to our Licensing Division and Public Affairs Office for their help in this workshop. The Get Licensed to Build workshop is a copyrighted production of the California Contractors State License Board. Thanks for watching.